Richard Krause.
Hey movie lovers, Richard Krause here. I just wanted to tell you about a movie called Julie and Julia, which opens on August 7th everywhere. Check it out. I had the chance today to sit down with Judith Jones, who is the real-life counterpart to one of the characters in the movie. Here's the deal. The movie starts off with Julia Powell, played by Amy Adams. She's a frustrated government worker. She's looking to enhance her life somehow. She wants to be a writer, so she decides on the idea of creating a blog based on mastering the art of French cooking, the famous Julia Child's book. Her idea is to cook every one of the 500 plus recipes in 365 days and blog about it all the way along. In a parallel story, we learn about Julia Childs and her life in France with her diplomat husband Paul. We learn about how she is also a frustrated government worker looking for some way to enhance her life, and she stumbles upon French cooking and writes a book that has now become a classic. Now, Judith Jones, the woman I spoke to today, her character in the film is the woman that realizes the worth of the book. She's an editor for Knopf in New York, and she signs the book, and of course it goes on to become a sensation, and Julia Childs becomes one of the best-known cooks of the 20th century. As I say, I had the chance to sit down with Judith Jones today to talk about Julia Child and the movie Julie and Julia. Let's have a look. First of all, congratulations on the film. Must be quite exciting for you.
Well, of course it's exciting. I mean, as Nora Ephron said, imagine a cookbook being the center of a movie. And it's an amazing feat that she was able to take the two Julias and sort of tell about parallel lives and the things that weren't so parallel and make such a delightful movie.
Well, that's the thing. Initially, I wasn't sure that it was going to work because the stories are quite different, and but then you start to realize the similarities between the two women and how they both found fulfillment in a very unique sort of way.
Yeah.
So I was very taken with it. Tell me then, because you're a character in the film, we should point that out right now. Tell me how you first became aware of Julia Child and what you thought of the book. I know that you were a bit of a Francophile to begin with. You met your husband in France and you enjoyed French cooking.
I was there during precisely the same time as Paul and Julia.
And had never met?
It's a wonder we didn't meet, but we didn't. So we met over her manuscript. And I think people pretty much know the story that the first manuscript got turned down by the Boston publisher, and fortunately found its way to Knopf, and they put it on my desk just because everybody knew that I had spent 3.5 years in Paris, loved to cook, and I really think they thought I'd probably say, well, this is too much. Right. But quite the contrary. I took recipes home and cooked from them, and it was as though it were an answer to my own prayers, because I realized how much you need to understand techniques, ingredients, what goes wrong, how to correct, cuts of meat, the differences, all of those things to cook well. Sure, you can throw a recipe together, but it's not just a formula, it's all the why and wherefore, and that was what Julia's genius was in these pages.
Well, it was quite revolutionary as well. No one had really written a cookbook for Americans in that way before, and she has a great quote here where she said to you, "We can't cater to the flimsies."
Yes.
Meaning, I guess we can't cater to people who aren't willing to read the whole recipe first.
That's right.
To really
and
devote
who aren't
themselves
serious and really want that difference between just a formula recipe and what makes it, as Julie would say, soigné, done with care.
Yes. Now, what was it about the book? Because it was kind of a behemoth. It was about 700 pages. It was quite detailed in a way that, again, was a little bit different than the cookbooks that have been published in America. But what was it exactly that grabbed you? Because you must have seen something there that was very unique.
Yes. Well, it was the detail, even the setup of and this was Julia's idea, to have the ingredients alongside and not to have them appear until you use them. And that makes so much sense, particularly when you write as long recipes as Julia, because you have to go back 5 pages to find out what vegetables she's talking about.
Right.
So that was unique. But it was a teaching book, and believe me, that did not exist then. And I realized soon that once you understood these techniques, you have it imprinted on your brain, and you hardly need a recipe.
Right.
Once you know how to make that famous bourguignon, you can do the same thing with veal, you can do it with lamb, the same technique. And so that's what good teaching is. Then you're ready to go on by yourself, because you've been enabled.
Well, I guess that was her whole point, was to introduce people to a different way of thinking about food.
Absolutely.
And it did. I mean, I don't know that people in an era of the Food Network and, how we see cooks on television walking us step by step through recipes now. I don't think we understand how much Julia Child really impacted the way that America eats now.
Yep. Yeah. And another thing she did, particularly when she got on television, was that she made it look fun.
Right.
And had a good time, and slapped that little chicken breast and says, well, it likes to be massaged. And that was very important, because we'd been told since the 19th century by the food industry, particularly women, oh, poor little women, they don't want to do something as demeaning as cooking. And there was also a very Puritan ethnic attitude that still prevailed. And that was that, well, you just didn't talk about cooking, and you get the smells out of your kitchen. It was sort of vulgar. That's sort of like talking about sex.
Right.
And I grew up with that completely. And Julia just lifted the lid off that, as I say, as she slapped the chicken and slurped the sauce and said yum yum. And I think that was very good for us. It released us. But also, and she said this to me repeatedly, Judith, you and I were born at the right time. And it's true.
A time of change.
Yeah, after the war, Americans were flocking abroad, even to Asia, the Middle East, having, once you could get an economy flight, and tasting delicious foods. And they brought all that appetite back. Right. And the Kennedys were in the White House, and they had a French chef, and it just suddenly became the thing to grow up and have sophisticated, delicious food.
Well, I was reading about Julia Child, and there's an article in the New Vanity Fair about her, which you're mentioned in, and it says that in the 20th century, 3 women that really changed things: Emily Post in the 20s and 30s, who taught people manners and courtesy and all that sort of thing.
Wish you were around now.
Yeah, I know. We could use another Emily Post now. Eleanor Roosevelt for strength and intelligence, and Julia Child, who sort of opened up the doors of the kitchen, I guess, and made it fun and entertaining to cook. Yeah. I thought it was an interesting...
That's very... I didn't know the other two. I knew they'd done the Julia piece. But,
Now, so you've signed the book. You have a 700-page cookbook, and you have to come up with a title. And the title, which you've come up with, Mastering the Art of French Cooking, after some work, we see that in the film. Your boss, Joseph Knopf, was not very impressed with the title.
No.
Is that right?
No, I told him we'd finally arrived at the perfect title, and Julia loved it. And he said, I said, Mastering the Art of French Cooking. And he scratched his head and said, if a book by that title sells, I'll eat my hat.
Did you?
But Julia's response to it was, we'd been playing back and forth, and her response was, I love the gerund. Now, nobody knows what a gerund is today, but the idea that mastering was a continuing process.
Right. Yeah, and
that
ongoing.
Ing.
Yes, yeah.
Richard Krause.